Lyndsay Feltham. I'm the Minister for Social Security.
I'm Sophie Lesueur. I'm Chief Officer for the Department of Employment, Social Security and Housing.
I'm Suda Hamill. I'm an Associate Director at the Cabinet Office.
Welcome, and we've got nobody in the public gallery, so just us today. We have an hour and a half for this hearing, aiming to finish at 2:30. I'm going to open with some questions on the minimum wage, and so obviously that was introduced in April of this year, and Minister, we understand that there was some level of confusion amongst the public, which you rectified by doing a blog post to explain that. So I'd like to open by asking about what were your plans in terms of communicating the changes around that legislation?
I think firstly the thing to make clear is that the confusion wasn't actually around changes that had been made to the legislation. Sure. It was around things that actually remained within the legislation. Okay. So around the age, for example, at which the minimum wage starts, which is school leaving age, and also how public holidays were to be treated. So there were absolutely no changes in relation to the employment legislation in relation to those two items. So it was somewhat disappointing that something that was positive got overtaken by some misunderstandings around the legislation. Of course, I did contact the relevant trade organisations such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Jersey Hospitality Association to ensure that they went out also to their membership to clarify that there had been no changes in relation to the legislation in respect of those things. Also, I'm in ongoing dialogue with JACS around how they can improve their communications out to employers and employees as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One of the other elements that I'm aware that there was some confusion about, because I had parishioners asking me, was the actual date whereby it would come into force and whether employers would have to start paying the living wage, paying the new wage from the legislation on that date or at the start of that month. Do you feel that confusion has been ironed out? Is there clarity on those points?
So I wasn't aware that there'd been any confusion about the date. So if you could forward me any of the correspondence that you had, I'd be really grateful for that. Yeah. The date was set, of course, last year. So there was a good advance warning that the date was the 1st of April, and it will be the 1st of April next year as well.
Why do you think some employers and employees didn't know about that then? Employees, perhaps, specifically?
It may be, employees, and I think that again comes down to where we can communicate as government. So, for example, we've just started the communications campaign around income support and benefits such as LTC. Yeah. One of the conversations I've also had with our communications team is, as well as there being a role for JACS around communicating people's rights and responsibilities, I think there is also a role for government as well. So I have also asked our communications team to think through that, and almost like a know your rights type of campaign. Yeah. We did, obviously, with the longer lead-in time, think that people should have enough time to know their rights. Of course, employee organisations have a role to play as well as employer organisations.
The unions.
So unions will have contacted their relevant members as well. But I'm always keen to know how we can improve communications, because at the end of the day, it's really important that people are aware of their basic rights.
Yeah, and you mentioned JACS and there being responsibility there for communicating, but also within government. Who has the ultimate responsibility for making sure that employers and employees know about their rights?
I think as Minister, I've got to be held ultimately accountable for ensuring that things are in place so that people do know their rights. And that's why I think it's important that I not only have conversations with JACS around improving the communications that we've got, that effectively is government-funded communications through JACS, have those ongoing conversations with our communications team and the department to ensure that we're doing everything that we can as government, but also, like I said, maintain that communication with the employer representatives to ensure that they're giving accurate information to their membership, as well as the employee representatives as well. So whilst you can entirely hold me accountable for ensuring all of those things are being done, and I'm working with those people to do that.
Okay, so whilst the accountability lies with yourself, what specific tasks or actions do you then require JACs to do, perhaps as a condition of their grant funding?
So we're in the middle of conversations with JACs around communications and how we can ensure that the communications going out from JACs are accessible and people are seeing them. I know that JACs have upped the amount of social media postings that they're doing at the moment, and also doing videos and things like that. Obviously, as those go out, I think we do need to monitor those and see how many views they're getting, what responses they're getting, to ensure that they are accessible and well communicated as well. So that's one area. And like I said, I think the other area where I can have influence is the conversations that I have with the government communications team as well.
And is there a duplication there in terms of comms around legislation that's part of your remit?
I think that's always something, duplication is always something that I'd seek to avoid. So that's why the conversation that I've had with my communications team is around, okay, well, what role as government do we have? And is it around people knowing their rights and knowing what legislation exists? Whereas JACs is there to be a kind of a contact point for employers and employees and give advice around the employment legislation. So I think they are two different things, but avoiding duplication is something that I'm very keen to do, and having those conversations amongst officers, I think, is incredibly important.
Okay, thank you. And the improvements in the communication that you mentioned, whether it's through JACs or government, when could we expect to see the result of those improvements?
I know that JACs have already started the work that they're doing, so we should start to see improvements. We should already be starting to see improvements.
Are you happy with the improvements they've made already?
I am happy that they are doing work and are taking communications seriously. I think that it is a work in progress. And there's an ongoing discussion for me to have with JACs around ensuring that the communications that are put out are easily accessible, they're hitting the right note. And I'm sure that JACs will also be having conversations with their stakeholders about that.
Okay.
I think, fortunately, one of the things around online communications is that if something isn't quite hitting the right note, you can change that. I also think that there's a place for paper-based communications as well in a lot of areas as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And specifically on the minimum wage, just moving away from the communication side of it and to the substance of it, could you just help me to understand exactly the approach around the different ages? Because I think that's where some of the confusion was around the younger workers and apprentices. Can you just very quickly give us a reminder of what that law actually says?
So that comes around the age at which the employment law effectively kind of kicks in, and that is school leaving age. It is I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head whether it's the June or the July, I think.
It's
in which
30th, so you get to school leaving age on the 30th of June
Yeah.
in the year in which your academic year in which you hit 16. So some people...
It's age-based.
Well, some people will be, if your birthday's between September and June, you will be 16 on that day. If your birthday's in July or August, you'll be 15, waiting for your 16th birthday in July or August. So it's the 30th of June in that year. It's basically the end of year 11.
So it could be before you turn 16.
It could be before.
Yes, okay.
I have children who were born on 22nd of
Yeah.
July, so they'd have been 15 on their school leaving age, for example, yeah?
Okay, yeah.
The underlying issue is the sense that employers would like more flexibility in terms of paying, whether it's apprentices or young people. They're two different categories. Do you have any desire to see flexibility in either of those two categories?
I think it's something that we had conversations around with Council of Ministers as well before implementing the minimum wage change. There wasn't a strong desire around age-based differences. I think I would see that as being quite discriminatory. If somebody's doing the same job, it doesn't matter what age they are, and also by the time somebody's left school, leaving age, they could well be supporting themselves, and I think we should be supporting everybody to do that. I think there's ongoing dialogue and conversation around what a trainee package might look like. Again, this is in the post-16 age group, and it's something that I have conversations with the Ministers for Sustainable Economic Development as well as the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning. I think it really does need to be led within the education and lifelong learning piece, because at the end of the day, if what we're talking about is education and people leaving with qualifications and skills, that needs to be led by skills gaps and then what we want to foster and what skills we need to grow in the island. So I know that he will be looking at packages. Of course, we have the Better Business Support package as well, in which we've got grants available to employers that have trainees.
Is that being targeted in the right places? Because the panel have become aware of instances where younger islanders in particular are trying to find apprenticeships and are approaching sometimes tens of different businesses, and the apprenticeships aren't there and they're just not able to find any work. Is the help targeted well enough?
Obviously, when it comes to apprenticeships, that's not within my remit. That would be questions, I think, to be raised with the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, because I don't have the data around apprenticeships.
Sure.
But I'm happy to have those conversations. And if the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning were to say to me, in order to develop skills, we need to look at how we look at traineeships within the employment law, then that's a conversation that I would have. I firmly stand by a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and.
Would you be prepared to accept? Are you at least sympathetic to the idea that just as the minimum wage allows offsets for accommodation for certain workers and so on, that you could have effectively a kind of a view that apprenticeship work or skills training in apprenticeships is a kind of a benefiting kind and therefore could attract a lower wage, a cash wage, because there's an equivalent benefit being given elsewhere?
I think any thoughts around that type of model would have to be taken very carefully. I'm just saying, because we're taking an assumption here that we're talking about, or I think we're taking an assumption here that we're talking about young people. When there was a trainee wage in place before, the anecdotal evidence was that it wasn't always being used for young people. It may be used for people in their first 2 years of employment in an organisation when they might have been in their 40s or 50s. The way that was done and the way that it's currently written in law, I don't think is specifically targeted. I think that in order to target it, you need to look at where the skills gaps specifically are and what the offering is to that person and what qualification they would leave with after that and their future career prospects. So I think it is a lot more nuanced, and that's why I talk in terms of more of a kind of a package that might be available. But again, I think a lot of elements in that package aren't within my remit. It's been dealt with within my remit, within the employment law and the trainee rate before, but I don't think that that's the most effective way of supporting employers and trainees.
You have some sympathy, at least with the concepts there from the sound of it. Do you have any appetite in the remaining term of this government to try and advance progress in that?
Like I said, I would be led by the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning and his assessments of skills gaps and opportunities gaps that they may well be. So I firmly see that he would be the leader in respect of that. But of course, I'm always happy to take representations from people who are concerned around the employment legislation side of things.
Would you raise this with the Minister and let us know whether there is going to be any work jointly to tackle it?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to update you as I go with conversations that I have.
Great, okay. And generally, measuring the impact of this legislation around the minimum wage, at what points are you going to be reflecting on what impacts it's having, you know, whether it's gone far enough? What are those points?
Obviously, we've spoken previously about the work on minimum income standards being progressed via the cost of living ministerial group. We will obviously receive the regular reports that we get on average earnings as well. Caritas as well will release its data on what it sees as a living wage in Jersey. So I think always at points at which the information comes through, I would have a look at what the effect and the impact. I've made a commitment, and that commitment was supported by the Assembly to move to 2/3 of the median wage for, I need to get my year right, because for 2024 in 2026. And I'm, you know, that's a commitment that I've made and a commitment that I'm sticking to.
Okay, thank you.
Can I move on to the Transform project? Could you just start by telling me your understanding, or telling everyone your understanding of the current situation?
I'm pleased to say that we have contracted suppliers in place. They are working in phases, and the first phase that they're working on at the moment is income support. I think Sophie will be able to speak in a more detailed way, because obviously this is very operational. But we all know that our systems are ageing. This is an incredibly important piece of work for the department. I'll let Sophie talk more about where we are at the moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, our supplier is successfully onboarded, fully engaged, and we're working really closely together. We're in the process of design and requirements workshops. We, as a department, have done a lot of pre-work, so we're in a really good place to be able to properly engage with the supplier about what our requirements are. And we are at our first focus at the moment is actually a proof of concept that we're doing, which we're developing, and that's on track for delivery by August. And that's just to make us all sort of confident before we do the full income support, which includes all of income support, impairment, fraud, in our first release, which will then sort of be ready for delivery by Q2 2026. So we're in the proof of concept phase at the moment, but everything is actually going very well at the moment.
Government has a long history of overspending and not delivering what it says it's going to in these sorts of IT projects. What procedures have you got in place to keep it within cost?
So I think we did spend we did spend a lot of time negotiating a contract, and I think that was a really important thing that we did, is actually a lot of the pre-work to get us into a place where we were really confident with a contract with a supplier that we were signing. So I think that's been really important. We've also got a very strong governance structure. That's something that we're sort of priding ourselves on, and we're within that governance structure, we've got different groups, and we've got a proper sort of financial oversight within there. Absolutely, we know that there's not necessarily a good track record for IT programs coming in on time, on budget, but absolutely this is something that even the budget that we've got, we are very clear that that is not a commitment to spend. It's absolutely the maximum we want to be at. So it's something I'm very conscious of. The Minister's made very clear to me as accountable officer that actually the focus on doing this appropriately is and keeping that financial focus. And sometimes it will mean making difficult decisions around the scope. Sometimes there will be things where we think, well, in an ideal world, we might have this, but it might be that actually within the financial envelope that we've got to make those difficult decisions. But that's what, as a board, we are there to do.
The budget was increased in the last budget, if you see what I mean. And the reason given was that the costs were greater than expected. But there was also a note that once the contracts were signed, you would look at seeing whether or not those costs could be borne down on again. Have you done that?
I don't think we're at that stage because we're at the proof of concept, but I will give assurance to the panel that I had, and as Sophie said, I've given very clear direction to the department that just because we have a budget, it doesn't mean that we should be seeking to spend it all if we can find savings within the terms of the programme. I've also been very clear that the programme team should take every care to pay attention to lessons learned from previous IT projects. We know that there's a number of lessons learned from previous IT projects, and we want to make sure that the same mistakes are not repeated. I've also asked them to look at where mistakes have been made internationally with regard to social security related project delivery as well. So, for example, I'm aware of the robo-debt issue in Australia and the Royal Commission report that was issued as a result of that. So I've asked the team working on it to be very aware of recommendations about those types of reports as well, so that we know that we not only learn from our jurisdiction, but we learn from lessons learned in other jurisdictions as well. I've made sure I've put all of those requests in writing. I think where I was, because as Minister, I've had to sign off on those budget requests. One of the things that I have raised, and maybe this is more of a PAC discussion rather than a scrutiny discussion, is where the role of the principal accountable officer lays within some of those bigger strategic programme delivery, because at the moment it comes from the accountable officer direct to the Minister. So again, I've stated quite clearly that I see that there should be a stronger role there for the principal accountable officer to take when we're dealing with such large cross-government projects as well.
The aim presumably is efficiency savings, which will save money. Have there been itemised goals in terms of savings?
Yes, there are, and they are all in the business case that was developed by the team and submitted to me as well. Ultimately as well, though, this is around safety and security and being able to deliver our services. We could not continue with the state of the outdated IT systems that we currently have, and investment in those IT systems is long overdue. I can't overstate the importance of those systems and the many multi-millions of pounds that go through those on an annual basis. So we can't afford for those systems to fail.
There's a contract being signed. How can you itemise what it is that they are supplying, how long the contract is for?
The contract is incredibly complex, so I'll see if Sophie can summarise the...
That's it. So I'm trying to think if we expect the programme to deliver by Q2 2028. That's our... So it is a multi-year programme with different releases, and what that means is that we will be, because we're delivering in stages, it means we are coming off our aged technology system, which is 20 years old. We'll be coming off that in stages. So we're not having to wait till the end to go live in one big bang. So we'll be going through until 2028. The contract is the basis of the contract is different schemes of work. It's kind of so it's set into different sort of 5 main releases. Within each release, we have different schemes of work. So even, for example, within the current proof of concept phase, we have different schemes of work which are then signed off at each stage, where there's very clear deliverables, expectations, and for us that really close working with the supplier from the outset and just being really clear. We know, we have to actually make sure we play our part of the bargain as well. We've got things that we need to deliver in terms of by giving requirements in the right way by certain times, but actually we really then also hold the supplier to account on the granular detail within each statement of work.
So you have very clear indicators about whether you will go to the next stage.
Yeah.
And if you were to decide things shouldn't go to the next stage, what processes have you got in place, or I imagine you wouldn't suddenly wake up one day and decide that. You'd have some indications in advance, but what is, if things go wrong, they do go wrong.
Yeah, the contract has been written, and which is something, again, from the Minister and the Political Oversight Group have been very interested and keen to make sure from the outset, before we sign the contract, that the contract is written in such a way. Obviously, we all, want this to go well and get to the end with our supplier and this sort of thing, but it is written in such a way that we absolutely do have breakout clauses at different points during the contract. So that kind of gives the comfort that we were looking for.
Can you remind me what is the spending envelope if you go the whole way with it?
So
I've got a figure in my head, but I want to check it's the correct one.
yes, that's it. I'm trying. It's 30, I think.
Let's see if it's in my...
Yes, no, I don't think it's in there, but I think
Almost 10 million
You've
for
probably-
2025.
yes, it's
Sorry, I should have
7.5
brought the
million
budget
for
table with me.
2026.
yes.
I've only got it till 2026. But
I think overall it's about 30.
Yeah, it was
Yeah, about
overall
30.
30.
30-ish
Just over
million
30.
until 2028.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, we have, the contract negotiations did take longer than we anticipated. So we've sort of,
Yeah.
we didn't spend as much as but it was really important for us. So we've kind of, elongated that
And
funding.
that's, just to help me understand it, that's with one supplier, but in stages,
Yeah.
the whole spending envelope.
Well, we actually have got the spending envelope. The supplier is a part of that, but our programme, we've got quite a lot of costs internally. Something that we've, as a lesson learned from, other IT programmes and that sort of thing, is that our core programme team, we've actually got a number of sort of internal Government of Jersey colleagues working on this. This is not kind of contractor-led, where we haven't brought in a big five to run this programme for us. Actually, our programme manager is someone who has, worked within our department for a number of years, come up being a project manager. We've got our programme team is actually, the lion's share are our people, and they've got skin in the game, and that for us is really important. Is we're people who know our systems, we know how we work, so obviously those costs are also a key part of it, so it's not all going to a supplier.
I think we could probably share that breakdown confidentially with Scrutiny, obviously for commercial purposes, because we couldn't do that in a public setting. But yeah, I'm quite confident that the financing envelope includes all of the costs that we need, and it was really important to me that I saw those internal costs as well being outlined, because then at least we know that we've factored in the resourcing requirements, because at the end of the day, the department still needs to deliver on its day job. So we need to ensure that the department can still function and deliver what it needs to do, in addition to delivering this really important programme.
And just can you confirm the overall budget, if you want? Yeah?
Yes, that's it.
Is
Is
it 30.6?
30.6.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, you mentioned lessons learned, and you were able just then to give us several things that you've reflected on and learnt from and incorporated that learning into your processes, which I think differs from the responses that we've had from another minister. Can you help us to understand how the learning that you have and that you've reflected, how could that inform similar projects in other departments?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because there's I suppose there's the community of practice within government around the corporate portfolio management office and the processes that are put in place centrally across government by that office, as well as the Treasury business case function. I do think ministers obviously have a role to play in ensuring that we do look out for, where there might be risks and issues arising. I think perhaps I'm fortunate from my background in project management and understanding how that CPMO process works. It gave me background knowledge to ask some of the right questions as well. Whether that's then how we have conversations among ministers, and maybe there is the space for more informal conversations among states members as well around best practice. So, I mean, I can use an example from when I was in Scrutiny, and also then when I became a minister, because I knew that the Corporate Portfolio Management Office exists and has really good, robust processes around it. When I was in Scrutiny, I asked for SLC and also my PAC to be briefed on that process so that they could understand it. I asked similar actually for a presentation when I became a minister as well. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and I think it is important that we're appraised of some of those processes. So I'm not somebody that thinks that bureaucracy is always bad. I think there's such a thing as good bureaucracy, and we should be making the best use of those good bureaucratic processes to make sure that we're managing risk.
And in terms of joint working going forwards, given that there are similar projects in other departments, are there overlaps and areas where perhaps there could be skills sharing, or maybe developing systems that work together? How could that work?
So I'm trying to get the title
Digital
right.
Government Platform.
The Digital Government Platform, but also the Chief Information Officer sits on the project control, project board, so that we can ensure that we have people from our digital services area involved in this programme. I did mention CPMO as well. I know that they have a community of practice to ensure that things are being shared across programmes and projects across government as well. And of course, we've got the political oversight group, which involves several ministers, which again, we can share information amongst ourselves. So, and also we've also got the Comptroller and Auditor General. So we've sought advice from the Comptroller and Auditor General at key points along this process as well. I'm very pleased that this programme's on her work plan as well, which means that the PAC will look at it. So I think all of those things are things to be valued.
If you had to identify some areas where perhaps you could look into further for joint working, what are those areas that you could consider about maybe cutting down costs for your department in this area and other areas? Like, what have you done that reflection?
Yes. Actually, before we went ahead with the contracting for this particular programme, for this system, we asked at a political level, are there ways that we can look to other jurisdictions? So the other Crown dependencies, for example, are there things that we can learn from them? Could we share knowledge and information around their systems? Also, how our systems interact with the health system is incredibly important. Those are the conversations that I know go on, on a daily and a weekly basis between Sophie and the other members of the executive leadership team. I expect that that's where those conversations be led, because they're more operational than political conversations. Obviously, on a political basis, I do have regular meetings with other ministers as well. So we will discuss those larger projects.
So is there a concerted effort to find areas that could be joint working and cost savings?
Yes, so just to sort of reassure you, is the actual foundational part of our sort of transform programme is something called our Digital Government Platform. And although we are it is almost sort of being built with transforming in mind. The whole sort of purpose of it is this will then become reusable, and it will become sort of the digital front door for government services wider. So we obviously want to be able to people to be able to log in and see their benefit payments, know what they've got coming up, understand their see any correspondence online, this sort of thing. But that is not going, the vision is that although the initial phase will be for employment and social security data, that absolutely this is going to then be kind of government reusable technology. So even upcoming appointments, things like this, the last thing we want is to have multiple different systems by department. So hence digital services are a really key part of our programme. So we're all very sort of joined up in that space. It just happens that it makes sense that we're kind of leading it now, but it's very much being built with other departments as well in mind.
Thank you.
Moving on to the HIF, Health Insurance Fund. When you spoke to us before, you were talking about the HIF as something that would go to, responsibility would shift to the Health Minister. Is that still something that you think is happening? And can you update us on what's actually underway?
I think it's fair to say that there's still an ongoing live conversation about health funding. Myself, the Health Minister and the Treasury Minister are all part of that conversation. The Health Minister has obviously presented to States members and Scrutiny around his vision for the health service and then how a single kind of source of health funding model would be his preference. That's kind of as far as the conversations have gone so far. I think obviously any transfer or thought of transfer of the HIF then suddenly becomes political. I think that there's more work to be done around the structure of health and getting that right first before getting into the politics of moving or not moving the HIF, because there's reasons why you might want to move it, there's reasons why you may not want to move it. So it is all embedded in that whole of health system funding conversation. And I've got a feeling I've got a meeting scheduled with the Health Minister and Treasury Minister very soon. So that conversation is very much a live conversation.
I have a feeling, Minister, that that's a change of tone from when you last spoke about this to us, in that you did seem much more happy with the idea that the HIF would be transferred. Is that something that you sort of reflected on?
I don't think my approach has changed. I've always been comfortable with the HIF sitting with the best possible minister for it. So if the recommendation is, and we can see everything panning out, that it is more streamlined and more efficient for it to sit under the health minister, because the health minister deals with secondary care funding and the HIF deals with primary care funding, and we need to make sure that both work together. I don't have a problem with that. So I just think that we're not in a space to discuss talking about changing a fund at the moment until we've got that whole model kind of ahead of us and we know that
you haven't given it up yet.
I've not given it up yet, no. But I will say I'm in ongoing dialogue with the Health Minister. When I make decisions in relation to the HIF, I always make sure that the Health Minister and his team are updated around those decisions and the reason for those decisions and the rationale, and then how those decisions might then interact and affect the secondary care funding as well.
How far away do you think we are from making that kind of decision?
I couldn't tell you at this particular point in time. I think that my preference would be to take that political decision after we've kind of bedded out what that structure of health and whole health model looks like, because I wouldn't want to get in the way of that, because that's really important. Frontline stuff around improving our whole health service, and that quite clearly sits with the Health Minister.
To be clear, there's two things going on broadly in that. There's a restructure in terms of the organisation, but there's also a funding question. Are you saying that both of those need to be sorted, or just the restructure element?
I think they're two separate things, but the funding element is a far more forward-thinking and broad, because we do have to plan for the future, plan for our ageing demographic, and plan for what the island's future healthcare needs will be. I can see the synergy between using our primary care funding effectively to effectively ensure that we save money in the longer term, so that people aren't going into secondary healthcare and needing more hospital beds and things like that. I'm just trying to think of something that, so if I take, for example, diabetes monitoring, that was something that I recently signed off on for funding from the HIF, around people having, and I don't know the technical name for the monitor that goes in somebody's arm, so they don't have to take their blood all of the time. That quite clearly is a sensible thing for us to fund, because if somebody's managing and monitoring or able to monitor their diabetes, then actually the result for the effect then of further complications is greatly reduced. So that's where the funding from HIF has a real impact on future funding and future savings within the secondary care as well.
I'm just going to follow up on that given that you, along with the Treasury Minister and the Health Minister, are part of this group that is looking at health funding, do you envisage having those issues resolved in the term of this government?
I know the Health Minister will be very keen to get those issues resolved. I think that's probably more of a question for the Health Minister, because he's, of course, leading on that piece of work. What I will say is those
part
issues,
of the group that's working on it.
those issues are incredibly complex, and it will take the whole Assembly, I think, to come to an agreement about what healthcare funding looks like into the future. I will obviously play my part, but I'm very conscious that we've now got less than a year of this particular term of office, so I need to be quite realistic about what's achievable within that. But I'm sure that health funding will be one of those issues that we're discussing with people on the doorstep in the next election.
Thank you.
I'm just getting the sense that you're talking about it as a very hands-off in terms of this, and ceding all the leadership elsewhere. I'm still keen to understand what you actually think is the best solution in terms of funding. You're the minister currently responsible for the Health Insurance Fund. Do you want or think that it is the best solution to keep it with the Social Security Minister, or do you think it should move?
I think that there are a number of merits of seeing it move to be part of the whole health funding landscape. I think there's a lot of merit in that. What I'd need assurance of before it moved is that we had funding for primary healthcare protected. So my position at the moment is to ensure that our funding for primary healthcare remains protected, because that's the purpose of the Health Insurance Fund, and protecting that purpose is my role and function right now. We know that there's health funding issues, and I wouldn't want that to cause future problems for primary health funding. So that's where my focus is right now.
You wouldn't want to see the money currently reserved for primary care raided to save the overall budget for health, or help the overall budget for health. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's a fair summary, yes. I think that it's incredibly important that we protect that funding available for primary healthcare, because we know at the end of the day it saves money in the secondary sense as well.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions now around cost of living, and specifically the cost of living ministerial group. And we have asked you about this group at previous hearings, and in March you said to us that the cost of living crisis needed to be dealt with by the whole Council of Ministers across a whole policy agenda for the whole government. Could you give us an update on the progress of that in terms of the cost of living ministerial group which you're part of?
The last meeting in relation to it, because there was a delayed, I think, cost of living ministerial group, which I think I spoke about in questions without notice, so that we could avoid any further delay with moving on the minimum income standard. I did meet with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and members of the economy team to discuss our preferred next steps around that, which will be then presented to that broader group. But what that means is the work can continue. What we've done is we've looked at what...
Sorry, I just want to
sure.
clarify. So when was the last cost of living ministerial group meeting since the 3rd of March hearing?
Off the top of we haven't had one on the...
There's
one
meetings have been
tomorrow,
arranged
is
and
there?
cancelled for a range of different reasons. I think it's just something that happens from time to time.
So
I
how
think it's
many-
tomorrow.
Yes, it says
tomorrow?
yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah.
And how
tomorrow.
many have been rescheduled?
I would need to come back to you on that, but I'm quite happy to do that. Sorry, my diary changes on a day-to-day basis, as I'm sure you can appreciate. I think what's important though is that the economy team have looked at what data they already have. We were conscious, and I think when we've discussed before, that the money that we've got for minimum income standards would enable us to do two kind of household types. I've made it very clear, as I've said to you in Scrutiny as well, that I think that we need to focus on households. If we can only do two household types, look at households including children. We know that childhood poverty is an area of concern, and I think that we can utilise the money that we've got to look at households where we can look at areas of child poverty.
Answering all my questions before I can get to them.
Sorry. And I think we're probably in agreement across the table over that as being one of the things that's a key issue. And then using some work that was done in previous years and updating that work so that we can have an understanding around what things might look like for other household types as well. So I'm conscious that we need to use the money that we've got in the budget this year to do what we can in the most targeted and effective way, but also try and understand how we can update previous data so that we can understand the cost of living pressures for other types of households.
So I'm hearing that tackling the cost of living is a priority for you. Do you feel, given that the cost of living ministerial group hasn't met since March, is it a priority for government as a whole?
I think it's a priority for all states members, to be honest. I think, and it is something that comes up because you don't have to be sat in a specific group of ministers for a topic like cost of living to rise to the surface of a discussion.
But are we going to get the solutions that islanders need if ministers aren't working together in a group like that?
I think ministers are working together in a group. Because of that delayed meeting, we had that separate meeting between myself and the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development to ensure that that work was still progressing, and that because we hadn't had the official meeting of the group, that it wasn't stalled. So I will always ensure that officers aren't waiting for ministerial decisions where ministers can't meet for other diary reasons. So if we need to take decisions and have additional meetings because of that, I'm always willing to facilitate that.
Is it fair to say that you're the driving force behind the government's work tackling the cost of living?
I think with my role of Minister for Social Security, I can't help but it being front and centre of the work that I do because of the situations that I see on a day-to-day basis. So I see that actually as a core focus of my role to deal with cost of living issues. But I don't think I'm any more of a driving force than, say, for example, the housing minister, because we all know that the cost of housing is one of the biggest issues in relation to cost of living. So I know that his focus is very much around the cost of housing. So.
And do you think it's worth reflecting on the leadership of that ministerial group to make sure that it's led by somebody who is prioritising this and who is calling meetings?
I think that the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development is committed to cost of living issues. He as well will always raise the issues in conversations that we have in any ministerial forum. around cost of living as well. So it's not an issue with leadership of that group. I think it's been an issue with diaries over the last couple of months.
What would you say that group has achieved?
I would like to say that we've achieved the allocation in the budget to get the minimum income standard piece of work done. As you will be aware, any ongoing dialogue and keeping things on an agenda is incredibly important as well. We do need times outside of a Council of Ministers meeting for relevant ministers to come together. So I will be pleased when we get that piece of minimum income standards work across the line.
I guess, for something that's a priority, it doesn't sound like a huge amount has been achieved. Are you frustrated by that?
I would have liked the work to have started sooner for a variety of different reasons. It hasn't, but I am very keen that I will continue to push for that piece of work to be done, because it is so important from my perspective around what our future benefits might look like, to ensure that people are getting the help that when they need it, and of course tackling issues such as child poverty.
And what are the targets of that group in terms of what output they want to achieve?
I'm just trying to think if there's, because the different targets would be in different ministers, minister in the departmental plans. It links together. I think when we meet in groups like that, we look towards the JESA performance framework, but also the different ministerial plans. So each group doesn't necessarily have its own set of targets, because it's working towards the targets already set out within those departmental plans.
Does it have published terms of reference and minutes published and things like that from the group? Or
they're not published publicly, to my knowledge, but again, whether that's something that we could share with Scrutiny.
Minuted.
Yes, yeah, they are minuted.
Okay, I'm just noting the time, and we have 35 minutes left, so we're going to need to pick up the pace of our questions. I'm going to move on to this one now,
Yep.
which is, if you could do benefit over payments.
yeah, benefit over payments. It's almost a year ago since you confirmed that any overpayments incurred due to administrative errors by the department were being written off. Obviously, everyone understands that some overpayments will sometimes happen now and again, but could you confirm what procedures and processes and changes have been put in place to ensure that any such issues are minimised, and how's that been working over the past year?
I think this comes down as well to lessons learned again. I'm sorry to be a bit of a broken record on that, repeating myself, but I'm actually quite confident that the department, when they do come across an overpayment that has been departmental error, have processes in place so that they can look at the lessons learned, look at that case and see what has happened, to avoid making similar mistakes in the future. Sophie will probably want to speak more around that. We've also done some work around smaller overpayments, and again, I think that has managed to reduce our overall overpayments quite considerably within the department, as well as reducing administration of chasing up some of those very small overpayments. But Sophie may want to speak more about the administration.
Yes, I think we're in a good position because, yes, prior to this sort of time last year, overpayments which had been caused by an administrative office error, we weren't actually recording in a way, so we didn't. There wasn't a way of us being able to easily pull out and say, well, actually, due to this reason compared to other reasons. So I think actually now we've got, on a weekly basis, I get a report, so I know exactly where we are week to week on what the situation's looking like by value, volume. the good thing is that when you're measuring something, you're really then focused on ensuring that it's minimised as much as possible. I mean, just for sort of context, if we look at so far this year, there's been 18 errors that have from office error, and that's kind of, there's been about 7,000 benefit rate changes. So that's the sort of, we are talking, less than 1%.
Total value of those?
So for this year, that has been £16,000. That's about, again, less than 1%. There's been about 35 million expenditure that relates to. But, that's not to say, we know that there's, errors can happen, but absolutely we want to be focused on learning lessons. We've got a really good sort of rhythm of, and this isn't actually about sort of blame necessarily, it's actually looking at, right, how can we, where can we do better training? What are some of our benefit areas are very complex. Let's actually use this as an opportunity to say, how can we do refreshers on this? Is there a risk of this type of thing happening again? So we've got now a regular cycle of training for the team on key topics. We've refreshed standard operating procedures or determining officer guidelines where we've seen something that sort of tripped us up in the past. So I think we're in a good position with this, but it's about really keeping the focus on that. And because we're looking at it, through a very regular lens, that's absolutely something that's really important to us.
Thank you very much. We finished that section. Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to some questions around the family-friendly legislation that we're currently reviewing. Obviously, there's a sub-panel involved. The members aren't present today. The public hearing on the will be on the 15th of July, but
Yes.
just a few general questions at the moment. In terms of the awareness of this legislation and an effective communication strategy, you spoke about this in your response to our letter, Minister, but could you detail to us what might have changed regarding your communication strategy since the post-implementation report that you published? So what have you learned about comms, and how has that been improved since that report?
I think I'm going to circle back to the conversation that we had earlier around the role for JACs around employers and employees and making sure that information is accurate and available and being pushed out as much as possible. I know that they do their training as well. I actually did look at the website the other day, and we will pass that on to JACs, because I think some of that website does need to be updated and refreshed so that it's more user-friendly, and we'll certainly work with JACs to enable them to do that. So that was a conversation I had with my officers just last week, actually. In relation to communications, I have been dealing with that more broadly, so not just related to family-friendly legislation, but to do with kind of the whole of my remit. And I've asked communications to go out with some outward communications that involve personas, so that people can see people that kind of might reflect them in their situation as well. And I've also asked for paper-based communications to be available as well. I know that my team work very closely with other relevant units, so for example with the maternity unit and midwives in relation to the family-friendly benefits as well. So that's, as I think I said in the last hearing, that process is kick-started by the midwives, so everybody should be seeing a midwife, and that's that key point of contact. Again, at fear of repetition around employer communications, I think there's still some improvement that can be done there. Only the other day I saw an email pass my desk where somebody said, oh, that person was still in their probationary period, so they weren't eligible for their parental leave. So I went back straight away on that and said that needs to be corrected because that person is. So I'm under no illusion that we've still got work to do.
Yes. So is it fair to say that you're
that.
not satisfied with the way that this law is being communicated at the moment, and that there are some big gaps that need to be addressed?
I think there are some big gaps, and whilst I'm happy to be held accountable for the government part in that, I think similar to the conversation that we had in relation to the minimum wage communication and employment law communication more generally, I think there's roles for the employer representative organisations. So there's a big role there for the Chamber of Commerce to make sure that that its members are receiving accurate information, as well as the Institute for Directors as well, and organisations like Jersey Hospitality. So again, there's a role for, I think, all of us to have in ensuring that people know their rights.
I want to ask you about the unions. So you mentioned that the unions have a role to play in this. And unions are largely staffed by volunteers. I understand that some union reps are allowed time within their contracts. Are they getting sufficient paid time to do the union work so that they can actually perform this function of communicating people's rights to them?
I think that would vary according to the employer. I know that
within government, say unions that represent.
It's not a conversation that I've had with reps. I know that, and again, it's not something that comes under my remit. That would be State's Employment Board remit around the agreements that are made in terms of facilities time. Having been a former union representative like yourself, I can recall lots of conversations about facilities time and an appropriate amount of facilities time, but it's something that it doesn't fall within my remit. That would be a question, I think, better directed to the Vice Chair of the State's Employment Board.
Do you feel it's important, though, facilities time?
I personally do feel that that's important. I think that having union reps that are available to give advice and support is an incredibly important part of the function. I think that it benefits. I was chatting to an employer yesterday, actually, and making the case that actually I think it benefits the employers as well, because better informed workforce is that cuts down on the amount of questions that might be coming through to whoever's managing the HR within that organisation.
Thank you. So we've spoken about communication of this legislation. What comment can you make on compliance with the legislation, particularly around job protection and non-discrimination during and after parental leave?
Obviously, the data that we'd have with regard to compliance, the only data would be around tribunal claims and data from JACs. One of the reasons, actually, I posted your link to your survey for Scrutiny. I think it's going to be really interesting, actually, seeing what Scrutiny get out, because you might well get more informal feedback on compliance or non-compliance and understanding than what I can get, because of course the information I get is when people have already gone through the formal channels. So that A, relies on people knowing what their rights are in the first place, and B, also relies on them somewhat sticking their head above the parapet in order to raise that.
And are you concerned that there might be non-compliance, or either willingly or unknowingly, given the comms issues, that people might not know about the laws and therefore might not be complying with them?
Yes, as I said, an email passed my desk just the other day where somebody thought that they weren't eligible to something that they were eligible for. So I would always be concerned around that. And I don't necessarily think it's people acting badly on purpose. The legislation is still fairly recent. I might take the assumption that employers should know what the legislation is, but I think as your review will show, that there will be some improvements that we can make, which is why I'm so welcoming of your review.
And do you feel that everybody who is entitled to parental leave is actually accessing it? Or do you have an idea of what percentages of people are accessing that leave that they're entitled to?
Of course, it's a statute. It's within the legislation that somebody who has given birth to a child has to take that first 6 weeks off and can't work within that first 6 weeks for all sorts of obvious reasons. But the concern may well be around second parents as well, and the ability for parents to take those longer periods of leave outside of the statutory leave. And I know, I get the same comments as you around the affordability of being able to take that leave as well.
Yeah.
So again, that was something that I'm keen to hear when we hear back from the scrutiny and see what you get from your consultation.
Do you yourself have any understanding of the extent of that problem of people not accessing their rights?
It's not data that I have or have access to, and it's not data that would be within the social security systems, for example. So we might well know what parental benefit we've paid out, but we wouldn't then necessarily know whether people are taking leave beyond that. Or how that's being shared out with parents. I've just had a note to say that with pregnancy and maternity discrimination, there were 3 claims in 2024, which was down from 7 claims in 2023. But of course, that's kind of the official data. That's not necessarily reflective of what's happening.
Yeah, and going forward to a tribunal doesn't necessarily reflect the level of issues that might be occurring with
Precisely.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask about a specific issue that arose in the post-implementation survey, which suggested that some employers were actually reducing some pre-existing parental leave arrangements and making them in line with the legislation, whereas before they had been more generous. You did say that you had a meeting scheduled to try and ascertain whether this was true. Can you update us on those investigations?
I'm just trying to recall if I've had any update recently on that, and I don't think I have. I also think that we're in a space where, due to our near full employment, employers are in a real marketplace for employees, and I think that type of behaviour would actually reflect quite badly and make them less competitive as an employer. But I'll need to go back to what I said in that previous scrutiny hearing and then track to see whether I've got more of an update.
So it was specifically, you said you were meeting with unions to understand whether they had information about this happening.
And to my recollection, I don't think that they did have any information about that necessarily happening.
Okay. Yeah, if you could double check and let us know if there were anything there.
I'm happy to.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, we've just jumped around a little bit. Let's try and take account of time. Okay. Yeah.
Long-term care. We talked at the last hearing. You stated that you wanted to consider changes to earning limits. The long-term funding of the long-term care, the care fund starts to get progressively worse after 2030. Have you made any sort of progress with those sorts of thoughts or discussions?
I have continued those discussions with my officers around what that might look like. I mean, I think I've always been quite open with scrutiny that I wouldn't want to see the percentage go up for working people without looking at the upper earnings limit first. I've had papers initially presented through to me. My next step is to present that through as part of the budgeting process within the Council of Ministers and have those conversations around that table. So we're ready to go on that subject, but it's a discussion that I need to have then as part of that budget process.
So you have come to some conclusions and you do know what you want to put into the government plan?
I've got some options in front of me that have been presented to me by officers. I haven't yet discussed those options with other ministers. So that's my next step to decide. But yes, my preference personally would be increasing the upper earnings limit in
The social
relation to, well, I think we can do it separately for long-term care. We know that that's the long-term, we know that long-term care fund is the fund that needs the income boost more than the other funds. So that's where my focus would be in the first instance, to see whether we can, whether there's any appetite to do that politically in order to boost the fund to.
Do you know how much that would increase the fund by? Does it do the job?
It's obviously would increase the fund by less than increasing the percentage that everybody pays, but I think that it's an important starting point. And from my perspective, on the base of principle, I think that that's where we should start when we look at increasing funds coming into the fund.
Would this form part of the budget proposals, or would this be a separate proposition?
I'm seeing it as part of the discussion that we would need to have as part of the budget proposals. That's where I would see that fitting in.
That's true, but it would need to be, it couldn't be part legally of the budget, it's separate, but it could be discussed as part of the budget considerations.
So what I'm hearing is that politically you think you would not sanction any increases in earnings limits without first addressing the upper earnings limit.
So are you talking about, instead, lower it?
The Minister doesn't want to increase the rate for everybody until the upper
Until
earnings
the
limit
upper
is being
earnings
considered,
limit.
yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was
That's
much
probably
clearer.
my confusing question.
Same
Sorry.
word twice, different sentence, that's all, yeah.
Okay. In terms of the long-term future of the fund, do you see any other necessary actions in this course, in this term of government?
Not in this term of government, no. Obviously, we need to be aware of the pressures with an ageing population and what then that looks like. It is also then linked to ensuring that our working age population remains healthy and is able to, continue and have a good, active, healthy lifestyle as well. So it's linked to all of those health promotion things that we were discussing as well. So you can't see everything, I don't think, in isolation, but certainly not in this term of office.
Okay. There will be actuarial reviews at the end of this year. So they will be.
Is that your next question?
Well, I was going to, but I thought I'd leave it slip. But if you want to update us on that,
just
then that would be helpful.
There will be actuarial reviews as at the 31st of December.
For Social Security.
Of Social Security, the fund separately, yeah. So they will be published kind of mid to late next year. So they will be kind of fresh, if you like, for the next council ministers to take decisions on. Long-term care, as Mr. said, is the fund which has got a relatively small amount of assets in it and increasing demand. So that's one we look at very carefully.
And that will be part of the action. That will be one of the actual.
That's one of the actual reviews.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. From one discussion about sustainable financing to another, we're talking about pensions and also touched on the ageing population. What work is being undertaken to ensure that the state pension remains financially viable into the long term and sustainable?
Obviously, the Social Security Fund itself is in the type of healthy place that we want to see it in. That will also be subject to actuarial review as well next year. I think also related to your question around pensions is the minimum income standard and understanding. But of course, what I've said earlier is that the piece of work that we'll be doing this year will be talking about specifically households with children. So it may well be that some of that more historic data that's already held might well inform any work that we do in relation to pensioner households. I do need to obviously make it very clear that if a pension is somebody's sole source of income, then that person would, in every likelihood, I think, if not all in all likelihoods, then become eligible for income support. People aren't, I think when people look at the amount of the state pension, again, it's not something that we can look at in isolation because it hadn't been designed at the time to be a single sole source of income. So as I've stated previously, that's where income support comes in for those lower earning pension households as well. So I don't think we can look at the state pension in isolation without also looking at the income support provision as well. In relation to secondary pensions, as I've previously stated, that is on my work plan as a piece of work to pick up towards the end of this political cycle as well. So the team that were doing that piece of work are currently focusing on some work around contributions flexibility. And when they finished that piece of work, they will then pick up the secondary pension piece of work. But that piece
It won't be complete before the end of the term, is that correct?
that will be a complex piece of work that will also require legislation as well. So that will be one for the next term of office. But of course, that won't prevent the work from starting at the end of this term of office. In relation to, because I think it is related to pensions, the parts around flexibility and contributions flexibility in relation to pensions, I've received a fair bit of feedback from people who have worked their number of years where they've got their full amount of pension contribution. So we're looking at what working more years might look at for them if they continued to pay contributions. Obviously, we want to encourage people to continue working if they can and they want to. But at that stage, people are saying, well, what am I getting back for my money for those additional contributions as well? So that's where that piece of work is focused at this point in time.
And given that the work on secondary pension, as you described it, it will probably start under this term. What's the outline aims of it? Can you just remind us?
So the outline aims is to fill the gap for people who currently don't have access to a workplace pension and employers that currently don't feel, because of their size and the nature of their employment, don't feel that they can offer a workplace pension. So it is about filling that gap for people that currently don't have access to a secondary workplace pension.
So designing a government-backed scheme that small employers can use. Is it something you envisage being compulsory?
So in an auto-enrolment style scheme was the type of scheme that was previously looked at by the previous government. I think that that's the only type of scheme that is probably going to solve that problem for people. But this is why I separated that out from the increase in the minimum wage, because my concern is unless we've got wages to a place where people can live comfortably, an auto-enrolment scheme people will only opt out of if they feel like they can't afford to contribute. So that's why I put the piece of work on minimum wage first, because very often I think the people affected are likely to be on the lower incomes. And I wouldn't want to start a auto-enrolment scheme for then only the people that need it to start feeling like they had no other option but to opt out.
So auto-enrolment means everybody goes in, an employee can choose to opt out, but an employer can't. So it's effectively compulsory for employers.
And this is why this piece of work is so complex, because it couldn't be done at the same time as the increases in minimum wage. So employers with, my understanding is that employers that already had pension schemes wouldn't be forced to participate in that scheme. But it's all of those things that need to be ironed out. Okay. And this is exactly why that's such a complex piece of work. But of course, they have a scheme now in Guernsey. We can learn from other jurisdictions that have those schemes. One thing I will say, because it has been out in media, people can also saying that there's a similar scheme in Australia. Having lived in Australia, I can say actually there isn't, because yes, you legally have to have a private superannuation scheme, but they don't have contributory benefits and contributions in the same way as we do. So again, we need to be very careful around how what is designed in Jersey is designed for Jersey and what works for our community, so that it doesn't then get seen as something that is instead of our already very successful contributions process in our social security fund.
You mentioned that the pension will, on its own, the state pension should not be seen as the sole form of income that will raise you to a decent living standard, and income support should fill that gap. Are you comfortable with that position? In other words, the other option might be to increase the pension so that you would not need income support, and indeed, in a way, that's the philosophy you've applied to the minimum wage. Would you apply that philosophy to pensions as well? Would you prefer to see a higher pension?
It was a challenge, I think it's fair to say, that I gave my officers as well when we discussed the secondary pension scheme. That was exactly the challenge I threw back around. Well, hang on a minute, why should we be doing this? Isn't that what the state's pension's for? And I think that there is a piece of work on people's perceptions around what the state's pension was designed to do and what the social security fund is capable of doing. Also, I think what we know from data and statistics that are available is that people at different stages of their lives do require different incomes. By the time you reach pensionable age, you may well own your own home. You don't have the same kind of financial pressures as somebody that's working age that is on a minimum wage and perhaps struggling to pay the rent. So there are different factors that I think need to be considered in relation to what might well be seen as a sustainable amount to live on.
So the perception is that if somebody owns their own home by retirement age, that the state's pension should be enough. But given that not many people might be able to own their own home by the time they get to retirement, is the state pension, is it adequate, or do we need to do much more?
I think it's doing what it was designed to do when it was put in place. There are a number of different factors that we need to consider if what we're talking about is addressing pensioner poverty. Just doing something with the state pension, which is at the end of the day unmeans tested, wouldn't necessarily be an effective target on pensioner poverty. So it is a more nuanced thing than whether or not the state pension, what rate the state pension should be at.
And in terms of, so of course the pension savers would target people who are retiring in the future, but for example, in terms of the gender pension gap, and the understanding generally is that there would be more elderly women living in poverty in Jersey, disproportionately more women. What measures are you planning to help those people in the here and now?
I think one of the things that I am conscious about is the gap for people that maybe just fall above the income support income test. So I'm currently looking at things like how we may well be able to extend eligibility to things like Pension Plus. And that, again, is a paper that I've had put together for me from officers. Because Pension Plus is one of those things that I think is incredibly beneficial to people. It provides kind of the right help at the right time around, again, keeping healthy. And it also provides access to the health access scheme and the cheaper GPs that are available through that particular scheme.
So that's funded services around health, isn't it, the Pension Plus?
So Pension Plus is a chiropodist, dentistry and opticians. So then that coupled with the with access to the HAS scheme provides quite a neat package around access to healthcare provision to help keep people healthy. So at the moment, that's where I'm looking at, is people that might just be missing out on that Pension Plus.
Is it enough, or do we need to do more?
In relation to...
In terms of specifically pensioners living in poverty and helping them now.
I think that's where the income support side of things come in. Again, back to communications, one of the things that I hear quite often is that people don't want to or don't feel like they should apply for income support. So again, changing that perception around who can apply, and also the perception around personal dignity around applying for income support is something that I am keen on changing. So again, that's part of that communications strategy at the moment. In addition to that, that's where the printed leaflets come in as well, because we've got printed leaflets aimed at pensioners understanding what benefits they may well be eligible for as well.
One group that have campaigned very vociferously is those people who are just above the thresholds who want the tax reduced on pensions or got rid of. What view have you taken about that?
Obviously, that's within the remit of the Treasury Minister. That would have a significant impact on public finances, and then maybe impact my ability to be able to help people with the lowest incomes. Of course, removing the tax liability on pensions, it would. Just trying to think of the best words, given I've been here for an hour and a half, and
Right, you're almost off the hook.
3 minutes.
the benefit would be applied equally to everybody, dependent on no matter what their means were, and if that then meant that I couldn't provide sufficient support on the basis of public finances to the people who most needed it, I think that would be inequitable.
You can also say that a person who's living on a state pension doesn't pay tax, and therefore has no benefit to them whatsoever.
Thank you. A very quick fire round on benefits, and specifically for terminally ill islanders. And Minister, obviously you've made some recent changes in this area. A rough estimate, if there are 10 claims in a year, that could cost around £236,000. Is this able to be absorbed into your budget, or will you need to seek increased funding?
Yes, that's able to be absorbed into the budget.
And what would happen if claims were significantly above that? Where would the funding come from?
It's unlikely that claims would be significantly above it. Of course, we haven't changed eligibility to people were always eligible for this benefit. The reason why there was a possible cost included in the report accompanying that proposition was because it may well have been that the process previously was seen as too onerous for some people at a really difficult time in their life. So we just wanted to highlight that it may well lead to more people making a claim but it doesn't actually lead to more people becoming eligible. Okay. So people would have always been eligible. That should have always been budgeted for because the eligibility hasn't changed. So that just goes by way of explaining what that increase in cost
And in
was.
terms of eligibility, have you considered amending those regulations to take into account islanders with degenerative conditions whose prognosis might not meet the 12-month threshold, but who still face substantial care needs?
That's something I haven't considered up until this point in time, but of course I'm always happy to take advice and considerations on board and look into things.
If you could reflect on that and let us know, it'd be great.
Can I just say, so something like most neurone disease, you'd qualify. So you may have more than 12 months to live, but your care needs will have accelerated to that stage where you will be getting help anyway. So this point, we're not changing the benefits are already there. Okay. We're making it quicker for somebody with a short-term life expectancy to bypass the paperwork, if you like. Yeah. But people with degenerative diseases will typically have care needs well before that 12-month period anyway. So
that will already be assessed.
Okay.
We're always looking at ways that we can improve the processes, though.
Thank you. Do you have any final questions?
Thank you.
From me? No. Okay. Minister, would you like to add anything before we close the hearing?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, thank you very much to you and to your officers for your time today and for your answers to all the questions. And there may be some brief follow-ups. We haven't done too badly, but we may have something to follow up